Hi everyone, and welcome back to Difference Frames the World. Today, we're diving into one of the most complex and consequential geopolitical transformations of the 21st century, the slow but undeniable shift of global attention toward East Asia. For the first time in decades, arguably since well before the end of the Cold War, the world's political center of gravity is tilting eastward. This shift isn't defined by dramatic battles, sweeping invasions, or simple narratives of good and evil. Instead, it's a slow, strategic chess match stretched across the Pacific and deep into the Eurasian landmass. It is a match without referees, a time limit, or clearly defined sides. We are watching a competition shaped by clashing worldviews, development models, and historical memories, with the United States, Japan, Russia, and China all moving pieces on the same board. Most of these moves are subtle: supply chain restructuring, quiet military agreements, and incremental policy shifts. But occasionally, something loud breaks through: a major military exercise, a sanctions announcement, a trade escalation, or a diplomatic confrontation. The loud events grab headlines, yet it's the quiet ones that ultimately rearrange the world. Beneath the mess lies a single, deep question. How does the world respond to the awakening giant in the East, China? Every diplomatic speech now carries hidden clauses. Every policy statement reads like a chess notation. Allies and rivals alike are waiting not necessarily for war, but for the next move that might redefine the next half-century. The game is well underway, unnoticed. Suppose we could peer into Washington's strategic mind, Pentagon simulations, and Situation Room briefings, or peel the onion of think tank reports. In that case, we'd find a mental map dominated by one region, East Asia, the western edge of the Pacific, China's neighborhood. For the United States, that is no longer merely one of its strategic interests. It has become the core of its strategic interest, above all other regions combined. For decades, America has portrayed itself as the defender of the global order, a term that sounds neutral but aligns closely with American preferences. That does not imply insincerity, as great powers rarely distinguish between a global order and their own order. But China's rise changed everything. Its voice is louder by day against the so-called rules-based order. Beijing is becoming, or more accurately, has become Washington's biggest enemy, surpassing Russia. Washington's approach to China has evolved almost mechanically. 1990s, a rising China, but not yet frightening. 2000s, a growing China, WTO entry, rapid growth, and early military modernization. 2010s. A competing China, tech rivalry, South China Sea tensions, Belt and Road Initiative. 2020s, a threatening China that warrants containment, chip bans, alliance reinforcement, supply chain redirection, and military encirclement. Only China possesses the combination of scale, industry, technology, military reform, and political will to challenge U.S. primacy, or as some call it, counter the U.S. piracy. Thus, American think tanks now churn out reports, simulations, and war games concluding that, if trends continue, the global balance of power will tilt. The world has already tilted toward the East. The correct wording is back to the East, because China was the center of the world 200 years ago, stronger than all the Western nations combined. Remember, it is not just a contest of GDP or aircraft carriers. It is a clash between two development philosophies. Western model, liberal, market-driven, alliance-based. Chinese model, state-coordinated, sovereignty-first, multipolar. The above two models are from the Western perspective, not the Chinese perspective, which portrays them differently. The Chinese believe Western powers arose from plundering other nations, and China itself used to be the victim. In sharp contrast, China has long been an agricultural country with a business DNA, engaged in trade with partners across the world, a phenomenon better explained by the ancient Silk Road and today's Belt and Road Initiative. Friction, therefore, is unavoidable. But a direct war with China? That remains Washington's nightmare. A conflict between them would be catastrophic, unpredictable, and globally destabilizing. As a result, the U.S. built the strategic wall: stretch China, don't break it. That is, Washington applies pressure without pushing the world into open conflict. Strengthen alliances with Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, India, and even Vietnam. Amplify regional tensions with Taiwan, maritime disputes, and tech choke points. Economic friction with tariffs, penalties, sanctions, and restrictions. Supply chain realignment with reshoring, nearshoring, and friendshoring. Tech restrictions with long-arm semiconductor controls and export bans. Capital redirection through screening investments and acquisitions. America's goal is not to defeat China outright, but to slow its rise, to extend American dominance by 10 or 20 more years. And at the center of this strategy stands Washington's most important partner, Japan. Japan offers the perfect combination of geological proximity, technological capabilities, economic strength, historical tensions with China, and a long-standing reliance on U.S. security guarantees. To Washington, Japan is both a partner and a proxy, though with risks. Japan is not a puppet, and the U.S. should know that. Japan has ambition. It seeks a restored geopolitical role. Supporting Japan brings benefits, but empowering Japan creates unpredictable possibilities. Still, for now, Washington sees the risk as manageable. Japan, for its part, gains space to rearm and reassert itself under the protection of U.S. involvement. For both countries, this equilibrium is useful. For the region, however, it is fragile. Tokyo is balancing itself in fear, ambition, and opportunity. Japan's strategy is shaped by its unusual identity, an island nation, resource-poor, technologically advanced, historically aggressive, and then traumatized. Now, a rising civilizational giant makes it feel unsafe, considering its past atrocities and the upsurge of China's nationalism. Japan views China through two lenses: fear, territorial disputes, economic dominance, and military imbalance. Opportunity, leverage between powers, justification for remilitarization, and increased regional leadership. Japan's long-term strategy is sleek. Use American power to achieve Japanese goals, while gradually reducing dependence on the United States. Thus, Tokyo modernizes its military, acquires strike capabilities, rewrites security policies, and joins semiconductor restrictions. All these moves align perfectly with U.S. goals, but also serve Japan's hidden agenda. Yet Japan walks a razor-thin tightrope: provoke China too much, and retaliation follows; rely on the U.S. too heavily, and autonomy shrinks. Meanwhile, Russia sits under immense strain: sanctions, NATO pressure, energy constraints, and technological isolation. It seeks one thing it has lacked since the fall of the Soviet Union: strategic breathing room. China provides exactly that. Their partnership is pragmatic, not romantic. Russia wants China to be strong enough to challenge U.S. dominance, but not so strong that Moscow becomes subordinate. So, the two cooperate in energy, military technology, diplomacy, and trade. Still, Russia maintains ambiguity, preserving the option to pivot if necessary. Donald Trump sees the niche and glitch, and he wants to alienate Russia from China. At the center of all these movements stands China, the gravitational anchor of 21st century geopolitics. The challenges facing China are unprecedented. Tightening U.S. containment. An increasingly assertive Japan. Russian expectations. European distancing. Supply chain disruptions. Technology choke points. Rising tensions over Taiwan. And disputed waters in the South China Sea. China's strategy is consistent. Defend its core interests. Avoid a direct conflict. And maintain long-term development momentum. Beijing wants to remain calm, firm, and patient. Time is on its side. China deepens domestic consumption or dual circulation, invests heavily in strategic technologies, expands global diplomacy, especially in the global south, and builds a military designed for deterrence, not provocation. China, too, walks a tightrope. An awakening lion or dragon, as the Chinese people prefer, faces the menacing encirclement of wolves. By the mid-2020s, East Asia had shifted from a regional flashpoint to a global pressure center. Washington's encirclement, Tokyo's rising ambition, and Moscow's situational alignment formed an intricate web of tension. No single act could spark war, but each move added cumulative pressure: military drills, trade wars, semiconductor restrictions, and naval patrols. Every action became a signal. Japan saw a historic opportunity: strengthen its military, deepen ties with allies, and increase diplomatic relevance. The deeper the US was involved in Asia, the more strategic space Japan gained. But miscalculation remained a constant risk. Sanai Takeuchi, the new Japanese PM, became the catalyst of the East Asia turmoil. Her remarks about Taiwan in early November angered Beijing, but Washington kept quiet. Donald Trump stands by, saying nothing. He is not as stupid as Japan anticipated, but he is crazier than most people expected. On December 2, 2025, Trump signed the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act, which amended and extended the Taiwan Assurance Act of 2020. The law mandates the U.S. Department of State to regularly update official interaction guidelines with Taiwan every 5 years, with reports to Congress thereafter. It aims to strengthen relations with Taiwan, enabling greater political and diplomatic engagement. Taiwan welcomed the legislation as a reaffirmation of shared values, while China condemned it, opposing the official contact between Washington and Taipei. Analysts view the law as part of a broader U.S. strategy to support Taiwan amid rising regional tensions. Another player, Russia, is performing an ambiguous dance. Russia leveraged tensions between Tokyo, Beijing, and Washington to gain maneuvering room. Cooperation with China deepened, yet Moscow preserved strategic autonomy, balancing collaboration with caution. China responded with patience, enhancing domestic resilience, diversifying supply chains, advancing high-tech independence, and portraying itself as a stabilizing force amid Western uncertainty. A soft exterior masks its steel interior. Finally, we can talk about Taiwan. Taiwan is the symbolic and strategic pivot of East Asia. For the U.S., it is a test of credibility. Japan sees Taiwan as a front line in national security. For Russia, it serves as a useful distraction. China insists Taiwan is the ultimate red line. Every move on or around Taiwan reverberates across the entire Asia-Pacific. Another focal point in the region is the South China Sea, a tactical canvas. Here, the competition becomes practical: patrols, islands, shipping lanes, and airbases. The U.S. asserts navigation rights, Japan expands involvement, China signals sovereignty, Russia supports multipolarity. The region has become a laboratory of modern power politics. The U.S. keeps sending its rusty warships to the South China Sea, hoping China will help scrap them, but the Chinese are smarter and not falling into the trap. We need to emphasize that China and Russia are two grapes on the same vine, and that they must unite as brothers. Several days ago, we published a video about the consequences of the Russians winning the Ukraine war, in which the Chinese-American scholar warned China might become the biggest loser if Russia settles the Ukraine war in favor of Moscow, which we do not agree with. Russia faces threats from NATO, and China is surrounded by malicious nations which want to loot China again, as they did a century ago, turning China into another Soviet Union. They have to join hands to counter the collective West. Western think tanks and the influencers they support inside China and Russia keep hyping up the historical disputes between Russia and China, especially about the Far East. They try to use China's nationalism and Russia's fear to separate them so that the West can defeat them one by one. Xi Jinping, Putin, and their future successors should always bear in mind that they must stay together to deal with the collective West. As long as they support each other, the world is safe. Despite the rising risk of military conflicts, the heart of 21st century competition is technological, in the fields of semiconductors, AI, quantum, rare earths, clean energy, and advanced manufacturing. The U.S. restricts China's access. China accelerates domestic development and gives better solutions. Technology is the new battleground, and China is winning on most fronts. China does not limit itself to Asia. Instead, it expands economic and diplomatic engagement across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. The Global South is now an active chessboard on which China is playing a vital role. Now, we want to discuss China's countermeasures and long-term calculations. China's response to external pressure begins at home. Its dual circulation strategy is designed to fortify the domestic economy while keeping China plugged into global trade, but on terms Beijing can control. Domestic circulation focuses on turning the internal market into a dependable engine of growth, strengthening consumer demand, especially in tech, healthcare, and clean energy, supporting innovation-driven companies, small and medium, and also high-tech startups, reducing dependence on foreign technology through targeted state support. International circulation keeps China globally engaged but with strategic adjustments, diversifying away from West-centric supply chains, deepening belt and road partnerships across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, opening to foreign investment selectively, requiring technology transfer, localized supply chains, and long-term commitments. The message is clear: vulnerability comes from relying too heavily on actors capable of weaponizing trade and technology. By balancing internal resilience with managed external openness, China aims to withstand global turbulence without stalling growth. Beijing sees technology not as a sector, but as the battlefield of the 21st century. Semiconductors, AI, clean energy, aerospace, and biotech are all treated as strategic assets. China's major pushes include domestic semiconductor fabs funded by state-led capital and public-private partnerships, AI, quantum research, and advanced computing, supported by universities and national labs, industrial upgrading with automation, robots, and green manufacturing, strengthened intellectual property regimes that selectively integrate foreign research and development into Chinese ecosystems. China's tech strategy cuts two ways. Offensively, it chases leadership in future industries. Defensively, it builds buffers against foreign sanctions and choke points. Every investment is calibrated, with each sector chosen for maximum leverage and minimum vulnerability. Then comes the modernization of China's military, which aims to protect the country from foreign attacks and interference, as it was during the centuries of humiliation. It reflects Beijing's preference for patience over provocation and deterrence over confrontation. China wants stability, not weakness. Core elements of China's military upgrade include advanced missile systems, including hypersonics and long-range precision strike capabilities, a modernized Chinese Navy, securing waters around Taiwan, the South China Sea, and key trade corridors, air and space assets, from stealth aircraft to drones and anti-satellite systems, integrated joint force networks, improving early warning, responsiveness, and situational awareness. China's doctrine is deterrence with transparency. Its capabilities are visible enough to prevent miscalculation, but not brandished recklessly. The sword is sharp, but it is deliberately sheathed. While other powers tighten alliances or shift militarily, China expands influence through diplomacy and economic engagement, such as Global South partnerships in infrastructure, digital connectivity, clean energy, and capacity building. It also calls for institutional reforms and alternative governance models, rather than following the rules-based order. Also, Beijing is getting smarter and has learned to use languages the West can understand, promoting sovereignty-based cooperation and a multipolar world order. In short, China is building an influence network that doesn't require bases or alliances. Connectivity, economic, diplomatic, and technological, has become its own form of power projection. If one concept defines China's approach, it is patience. Beijing avoids premature conflict, adjusts strategies as pressure shifts, and aims for long-term advantage through incremental gain, not risky leaps. Calibrated messaging to deter without alarming. Flexible adaptation to sanctions, supply chain shifts, and alliance realignments. Careful perception management to maintain an image of stability and restraint. That is not passivity. It is a long-term orchestration of influence, designed to outlast short-term political cycles abroad. By the late 2020s and early 2030s, a recognizable pattern emerges. The U.S. applies strategic pressure, alliances, tech restrictions, and supply chain shifts to maintain its primacy. Japan expands its security footprint, cautiously but consistently, to restore its political and military status. Russia maneuvers opportunistically, leveraging tensions among the US, Japan, and China to take a short break. China counters with economic resilience, tech self-reliance, military deterrence, and active diplomacy to deal with upcoming threats. These chess pieces move deliberately. The board is never still. China is no longer reacting to containment. Rather, it is shaping the environment around it. China has become a multidimensional strategic actor, deterring, developing, and diplomatically maneuvering. At the same time, the other three major powers cast their shadows across the Pacific and Eurasia, where the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea remain the most sensitive and volatile flashpoints. Beneath all these explicit dangers lies the most active battlefields we never see, including cyber intrusions targeting infrastructure, research labs, and industry, semiconductor and AI export restrictions, supply chain manipulation and corporate pressure, intelligence competition in digital domains. A simple keystroke could destroy a country. The greatest risk in this multi-actor environment is simple misunderstanding. A minor incident could spiral into something far larger, without any actor intending it. As the world increasingly relies on electricity and cyber networks, it is becoming more explosive and fragile. East Asia demonstrates a modern truth. Power is now defined as much by patience and perception as by armies and GDP. The US applies pressure but avoids war. Japan expands while relying on US backing. Russia maneuvers for leverage and space. China responds methodically, balancing growth, deterrence, and diplomacy. The board is alive, dynamic, and unpredictable. China meets pressure with a strategy that seems soft until we look more closely. The edges are sharp. Economically, China remains open but on its own terms. Market access tied to local research and development, tech transfer, and supply chain localization. Huge incentives in green tech, EVs, AI, and semiconductors. Belt and Road 2.0 with diversified financing and lower debt risks. That wedges foreign companies away from their governments, business logic pulling them toward China even as political pressure pushes the other way. China is paying less attention to what the US thinks and does. Its diplomatic strategy is global and methodical. In Africa, infrastructure, energy, digital partnerships. In Southeast Asia, economic integration and maritime cooperation. In Latin America and Central Asia, trade corridors and investment. In the Middle East, energy cooperation and diplomatic engagement. Worldwide, China is becoming an indispensable partner, reducing the US monopoly over development finance and global influence. On the military side, China modernizes its army but avoids dramatic, expansionist moves. Hypersonics and stealth UAVs signal capability. Advanced naval systems secure key maritime spaces. Transparency in drills increases predictability. China seeks stability through credible deterrence, not provocation. China's tech strategy blends autonomy and controlled openness. Massive domestic investments in research and development. Friendshoring and domestic production buffers. Conditional collaboration with foreign firms. By shaping both supply and innovation, China makes external pressure less effective and more costly. Now, China's strategy influences economies and politics far beyond Asia. Supply chains shift. Commodity and tech markets reprice. Developing countries gain new diplomatic options. Regional powers adjust security policies. Even distant economies feel the ripple. That is why France wants to follow China, not the US, and other European nations may follow suit shortly. China is not merely a rising power, it is an awakened giant reshaping global order through diplomacy, strategic economic openness, technological ambition, and measured but formidable military deterrence. The US, Japan, and Russia each cast their shadows, but China moves with calculated, steady momentum. Sudden wars won't define the coming decades, but long-term strategic maneuvering will. Understanding this slow, deliberate chess match is essential. The decisions being made now will echo across the 21st century. The awakened giant is not reckless. It is patient. It is resilient. And it is shaping the future in ways the world can no longer ignore. As a result, we see Donald Trump respect Xi Jinping like a pupil worships his teacher, in a rare display of humility.